In the back of my mind, I've known for a long time, my knives are not nearly as keen as they should be. And I bet that most people watching probably share this problem. What you're seeing now is what I've always wanted my knives to be capable of. And after weeks of studying and practicing hand sharpening, it's finally a reality. If you want your kitchen or pocket knives to be shaving sharp like this, I'll tell you exactly how I get mine to that level, using only a flat stone and a strop. Maybe get ready to take notes. For comparison, I recently received this Husk knife as a gift. It's advertised as extremely sharp. And here's how this blade performs on some of these tests, straight from the factory. And don't get me wrong, factory sharp knives are well sharp enough for most purposes. Most home cooks, that's as sharp as they need them to be. But over the years, they get duller with use, and it happens slowly enough that you forget what even that factory sharp edge felt like to use. And I always kept my most important knife, the chef's knife that I use most every day, relatively sharp. I have this aluminum oxide stone that I bought from an Asian grocery store many years ago for a few bucks. And once in a while I would get that stone out, I would get it wet, and I would sharpen this knife on it to the best of my ability. I would get it to paper cutting sharp, which is the only test that I really knew, and I was able to get it there. I also have this steel honing rod that came with that knife set, and I didn't understand really what it was meant to do, but I'd heard that you're supposed to use it between sharpenings, maybe every time you cook, in order to keep your, I don't know, but I used it and I was happy enough in my ignorance. But the other day, a friend came over to cook dinner. I gave him a knife that I had sharpened just the day before, and after cutting a few items, he turned to me and said, "Is this like the sharpest knife you have?" Wow. I strongly considered just walking into the forest and never being seen again in society. But instead, I decided it's finally time to get serious about knife sharpening. I wanted the skill and the confidence to be able to achieve razor sharpness every single time on my knives. And what's more, I wanted to understand what's actually going on at the microscopic level, at that blade's edge. But like anything, what seems fairly simple on the surface is actually quite complex. A common comment that I get on my cast iron videos is that I'm overcomplicating something that should be simple. Just cooking it, they say. But that might be good enough to get 80% of the performance out of something. But I like this stuff, I think it's fun. I want to actually understand what's really going on. And with that knowledge, you can push it to getting 100% performance out of your skillet or out of your knives. With sharpening, some of those complicating factors include the type and hardness of the steel that your knives are made out of, the angle of your bevel, the type of your bevel, how many bevels that you might have on your knife, the type and grit of the abrasives used when sharpening your knives, the aids that you might use to help you hold that angle, the skill of the sharpener. It just goes on and on. And on top of that, there's a lot of conflicting information and straight up misinformation out there when you're learning how to sharpen knives. I know because I spent the last 3 weeks deep diving and practicing hand sharpening knives. Here's what I learned. And a big shout out to another YouTuber, Alex at Outdoors55, has done a lot of really great work and videos demystifying sharpening. And much of what I've learned recently comes from his videos. If you want to see an expert like him dive deep into this topic with some really fantastic macro imagery, then go to Outdoors55 and binge his channel. But there are a couple of really important factors to sharpening that I discovered along the way, the hard way, that even Alex doesn't seem to talk about. So if you want to learn everything you need to know to get an edge this keen in just one video rather than 20, then get comfortable and stay right here. let's get into it. The geometry of a knife's edge is actually composed of a few different elements. The shiny flat area here is called the bevel. That's immediately preceding the actual cutting edge up here. Now, given that all else is equal, the angle of this bevel is going to determine how it cuts. A more obtuse angle like this won't be quite as sharp, but it will be more resilient to abuse. A smaller, finer angle like this is going to be a more keen cutting edge, but will also be more fragile. An angle like 14 degrees is great for filleting fish or something like that, but for a pocket knife that's going to be abused, you probably want an angle of 20 degrees or more. Now, a pause here for some nuance. What I'm talking about is flat V sharpening. It's not the only way to sharpen. So there's also convex sharpening, where you achieve something more like this, where these bevels are rounded. Now, for the sake of simplicity, I'm not going to talk much about convex sharpening today, but the gist is that a convex angle like this has some advantages. Most notably, it increases the durability. That's why you'd see this convex angle of sharpening on the edge of an axe, because it's high impact tool and it has to be resilient to those high impacts. The very edge where the bevels meet is called the apex. All right, you're not the star of the show today, Deimos. The apex, right here, where the bevels meet, the actual part of the knife that does the cutting. Now, if your knife doesn't have an apex because it's dull, it's damaged, it's not going to cut very well. You need those bevels to meet at a point, and that's what you're doing when sharpening, is you're grinding away the steel here of this bevel, and so that it meets at that apex, and you're creating a new apex. But wait, what are we grinding those bevels against? Well, there are many different types of abrasives that you can use to grind away that steel. Alex at Outdoors55 actually says that dual grit, cheap aluminum oxide stones like this are actually the worst thing to use, especially for a beginner. They require constant re-wetting in order to use properly. They dish, meaning that it actually becomes not flat anymore as you use it. The abrasive itself wears away, causing it to create a dish shape like this, which requires re-flattening, using something like a diamond stone or a truing stone to actually grind away some of the high spots and make that stone flat again. That tendency to dish is true of most other stone types as well, which is why Alex recommends using diamond stones, which are actually blocks of steel with the surface embedded with microscopic diamonds of a specific size. Larger diamonds for coarse stones and smaller diamonds for fine stones. After using a diamond stone like this dual-sided stone from Sharpwall, I also recommend using them. They don't require any water or oil, they never dish, but the diamonds can become loose and fall out of the surface, which is how these diamond stones actually wear out over time. But if it's well made and those diamonds are well adhered, it lasts for a long, long time. This one's case even doubles as a stone holder, which makes it very convenient to use. And I'll include a link to this and any other equipment that I'm using in this video in the description below. Affiliate, of course. So now that we got our stone, we got our knife, it's time to start sharpening. Wait, no. First, we gotta set the angle, right? So a good angle to start with for most knives, especially chef's knives, kitchen knives, is 15 degrees. This is a good balance point, as far as I've learned, between that really sharp, really keen, low angle and the more obtuse, tough, resilient angle that you'll need. So for a chef's knife, 15 degrees is a good place to start. This Sharpwall comes with this little pyramid thing that allows you to, that aids you in finding the right angle. So you set it on your stone, you set your knife against the angle that you want, and it gives you that proper angle. Kind of. See, it doesn't actually give you the true exact angle, because what you're wanting is the angle from this center line of the knife to the stone. And what you're getting with the pyramid is the angle from this lower aspect of the knife to the stone. So what you think is 14 degrees might actually be 15 degrees or 16 degrees. So just take that into account. Another way of finding the angle is to take an old credit card or gift card and cut it at whatever angles you want to use. This does not solve the spine thickness issue though. It just reverses it. A 14-degree angle will become 12 or 13 in practice, for example, instead of becoming 15 or 16. If you want the exact measurement, then you have to do the math yourself, factoring in the thickness of the spine here and the width of the blade and all that. But to be honest, it's not very important. The exact angle that you get is not as important as keeping that angle consistent while you're sharpening. Okay, I think we're ready to actually sharpen now. Using that angle aid, I can find my angle that I want, 15 degrees. And then, even if it's not exactly 15 degrees, doesn't matter. I just keep that angle that I've found consistent. And the way that I do that is that I place my thumb on the spine of the knife, also resting on the stone. And I memorize where that spine is touching my thumb, just by feel. It's a little bit above the center line of my thumb in this case. And I can always, as long as I remember where on my thumb that spine is hitting, I can always come back to that same angle, is the idea. And once I have that angle, I place the knife flat against the stone. I support here with my offhand, and I push. Now I'm pushing, as you notice, I'm pushing with my whole body. I'm not using my wrists or my hands like this. I'm moving my entire torso as I sharpen. And that's also to aid in keeping that angle consistent. If you want, you can put your arms into it, but move your shoulders and your elbows like this rather than your wrists. The larger muscle groups that you can use rather than the smaller ones, the more consistent you'll be able to hold that angle. Doesn't much matter how you orient the stone. I like straight from me, but if you like it like this, I don't know why you would, or like this, whatever, you can do whatever is comfortable for you. There are a few methods I've learned to actually see what you're doing and get an idea of if you're doing it properly or not. First, you can just look at the bevel. It helps to rotate it against a light source in order to get that bevel to shine and see where you're actually grinding and scratching the steel. You want to see a uniform bevel with a single plane, and you want to see it reaching all the way to the edge. You can see on this one, there are actually many different planes on this bevel. This is when I first started sharpening, and that means that I'm not doing great at keeping my angle consistent. This was a few weeks ago when I first started practicing, and honestly, I probably need a couple more years of practice and experience to get really good at this. But in my experience, some small inconsistencies aren't going to stop you from getting a keen edge. Just do your best. In order to get a closer look, I can also use a magnifying glass or a jeweler's loupe like this one. Then there's the Sharpie method. I color in the whole bevel with Sharpie, then take a single pass on my stone. This shows me exactly what part of the bevel I'm cutting into, and it can reveal any imperfections in my technique. Okay, buddy, not so safe here. All right, so you can divide the blade into sections. As you can see, I'm just sharpening this section closer to the heel. Starting with that section, and then I can move over, maybe do a middle section. Using my other thumb and putting the spine of the blade at the same part of that thumb that is on this thumb. And then finishing at the end here. Or I can do it all at once, setting the blade at an angle like this. I can get the entire blade. I can go like this. One technique that I have acquired and that I like is going back and forth. And you can combine all of these techniques. You can start going by sections and getting most of the rough work done, and then spend some time doing the whole blade like this in order to smooth out any inconsistencies between those sections. Whatever you gotta do. So here's where I actually encountered an issue that I haven't seen really any knife sharpening videos on YouTube talk about. And I'm sure someone out there is talking about this, but I've watched dozens and dozens of knife sharpening videos at this point over the last few weeks, including binging Outdoors55. Watched dozens of his videos, and I've never heard him mention this, which is strange. And that is that a lot of knives, they'll be relatively flat here, And then they have what's called a belly as the knife curves up toward a point. And you have to change your technique as you're sharpening that belly. You can't use the exact same technique as you would with a more flat edge like this knife has. You really like being in the way, don't you? Okay, so what you gotta do is instead of just holding that same position all the way through, because if you do that, you'll be missing the actual bevel as the blade turns and the angle changes. So what you have to do instead is rotate your wrist forward and down as you move along that edge. In order to, what you're actually doing is keeping the same angle along the edge, but it doesn't really feel like that as you're sharpening. But what you want is for that bevel on the other side to keep contact with the stone all the way through. Another technique you can use is instead of turning your wrist, you can actually just lean your entire body. Something like that. If you don't do this well, then you'll end up with a sharp, keen edge here toward the heel of the knife, but a poorly sharpened, dull belly portion of the knife, which is not what you want. You can also grind away the wrong area of the knife, as you can see on this blade. This is before I learned about these techniques, and you can see that I wasn't actually grinding the bevel itself, I was grinding behind the bevel. Some knives like this one are pretty much all belly. It's just a curve all the way through. And you'll notice that you don't just need to do this technique at the belly, but also sometimes at the heel, because there's a continuing curve. It can be more subtle than the belly, but it is significant. And if you don't account for it, you'll notice that you're not actually getting a sharp edge here at the very end toward the heel. So what you have to do in this case is, you either lean to get that belly like this, or you rotate your wrist. But then also, as you're sharpening toward the heel, you have to lean. Lean to the right or twist your wrist in order to keep contact with that bevel the whole way through. Don't get frustrated. This takes practice. This takes time to develop this technique. The Sharpie method is very valuable for this. It will tell you exactly what areas of the bevel you're actually grinding and which areas you're missing. So I keep going, keep sharpening along that same side of the knife until I have a uniform burr all along the edge. This shouldn't take all that long if you're using a coarse diamond stone like this. They cut pretty aggressively. If you're not blundering through and making a bunch of mistakes, it could just be a couple of minutes. Or if you're dealing with a really dull blade that needs like a new profile, it could take up to 20 minutes. So what is a burr? Well, a burr is what happens when you've removed enough metal that you've apexed on one side. So if I remove just this much, I haven't apexed yet, there's still this dull flat plane at the top instead of an apex. But if I sharpened along this dotted line and removed all the material to the left of that dotted line, then I've apexed. And what happens is that I'm left with these shreds of steel that are left over that used to be, right like here. And now they're left over, clinging to the edge. And those shreds of steel are pushed over to the other side, opposite from, okay. And those shreds of steel are pushed over to the opposite side of where you were sharpening. If you're sharpening here, they get pushed over to the opposite side. And that's why when you run your finger over the blade like this, not across the edge, but over the blade, starting from the spine, moving over the edge, you should be able to feel that burr catching on your skin. A little scratchy, there's a little friction. And if you can feel that, then you know that you've apexed, because otherwise there would not be a burr. And that's what you want. You want that along the entire edge of the knife before you move over to the other side. You can also hold up a flashlight to the back side of your blade, shining towards the apex, and you should see a shine wherever that burr is. If there's no shine, then there's no burr. Those steel shreds should catch and reflect the light. You can also use that jeweler's loop to get a closer look. But however you detect it, the presence of that burr, it's the clearest sign that you've apexed, that you've actually reached the edge, not just polished the bevel behind the edge. Ultimately, my goal is to completely remove the burr. If I leave any burr on there, then it will bend back and forth over the apex as I use the knife. So my knife might feel very sharp in the first cut, but after just a few cuts, that burr will bend over the edge potentially, and it'll feel dull again. So I don't want that burr there after the sharpening is done. But I do want to see that burr when I'm finished profiling the first side of my knife. So once I've apexed, I have that burr all along the edge of the blade, I flip my knife and start working on the other side. I like to just change hands, and so I'm still pressing from here. Some people like to keep it in their right hand and use their index finger here at the end as a guide. I don't do that as well. That just doesn't feel as comfortable for me. I just like switching hands and continuing to use my thumb, my other thumb. But do whatever is comfortable for you. So what I'm doing here on this side is exactly what I was doing on the other side. I'm working the opposite bevel, trying to apex. And how do I know that I've apexed? Well, I'll have a burr, a uniform burr, all along the other side of the blade. That's what I want. That's how I know that I've apexed on both sides. Once I've done that, I stop with the edge trailing strokes, meaning pulling back, and I do alternating edge leading strokes, pushing forward. Okay. Are you gonna let me finish this video? So what I'm hoping for now, what I'm trying to accomplish is to remove that burr. And by doing alternating edge leading strokes, I'm working that burr back and forth, bending it, breaking it, hopefully removing it as much as possible. I want probably at least 20, could be up to 50 alternating strokes. And as I go, I'm gradually getting lighter and lighter until I'm ending with just feather light strokes. And if you're doing this properly, then you're doing most of the work on the coarse side of the stone. There's not going to be a lot of work left to do on the fine side. I will say that the harder, higher quality steel that you have, the easier this process will be. Because it's harder, it tends to, instead of just bend, it tends to break off that burr more easily. The softer steels, the burr can just bend back and forth, and it can be more difficult to remove. But do the best that you can, remove as much of it as you can. Use those burr detection methods like feeling along the edge and the flashlight method in order to tell if you've properly removed that burr, because that's very important. At this point, my knife should be quite sharp. It should slice paper, no problem. If it's not at least that sharp, then you messed up. You did something wrong. Go back to the drawing board, get back to the beginning, and do it again. Keep practicing. There's also another flashlight trick that you can use at this point to inspect your apex. To do this, you and the flashlight should be looking directly at that apex, like you're going to cut your face in half. If you've truly apexed, then there should be no direct reflection of the flashlight's light into your eyes. So contrast that with a dull knife that has a flattened apex. It'll have bright spots or even a bright line all down the edge because it's a flat plane and it's reflecting the light back into your eyes. But if you've apexed, you should not see any of that direct reflection back towards you. Once I know that I've done my job on the coarse side, I flip over to the fine side of the stone. Start with a few back and forth strokes on each side, like I did on the coarse side. And I'm not trying to remove a lot of material here. I'm not using a lot of pressure. The goal isn't to remove a lot of material because you already did that step. You already have your apex. The goal is to polish out those deeper scratches left by the larger diamonds and create a smoother bevel and a smoother apex by consequence. Now, once I've done those back and forth strokes on both sides, then, like before, I do alternating edge leading strokes starting a bit more firm and then gradually becoming feather light. And you really want to do it, like get to that point where it's as light as possible, like less than the weight of the blade itself. You're actually lifting the blade up a little bit rather than pressing down, or even just letting the weight of the blade do the sharpening. And this is something I had to learn the hard way. I was wondering why I wasn't getting as keen of edges as I wanted to. And this is a tip that I picked up, is to really progress toward that feather light stroke. Now we've made it to the final step, stropping. Now, to be honest, it took me quite a while to understand what stropping is and how it's different from sharpening, but I think I got it now. So a strop is a softer surface than your sharpening stone. A strop is usually made of leather. I chose to use balsa wood, which is another option. I mounted balsa wood strips to larger foundation blocks so that I can hold that block as I'm stropping. Then abrasive compounds like chromium oxide or diamond are then spread over the surface. There are different grits available of these compounds, so you can progress through finer strops if you want to. I tried 3 different sizes of diamond compound: 4 micron, 1 micron, and 0.1 micron. A micron is 1,000th of a millimeter, and that measures the size of the diamonds in these compounds. These aren't cheap. This little bottle of 4 micron compound cost over $50. It is a bottle of diamonds, literally, so I guess it makes sense, but still not cheap. And this is way more than you need. I should not have bought this. You can also buy them in syringes like this, which contain less than this bottle, and you don't need a bottle. Like get a very small amount. You do not need much. Once I have my strop prepared, I draw the blade along this material with edge trailing strokes only, so that the edge doesn't cut into the soft, pliable surface and ruin my beautiful new strop. These stropping strokes are very light, just the weight of the knife. The goal is to further polish the edge, remove any last shreds of burr, and add a microscopic convexity just before the apex. This convexity happens because the strop is soft, like I said, and has a slight give to it. I demonstrated this in an exaggerated way using this blanket. So you can see how I draw the blade backwards along the strop. The material doesn't stay flat. It curves and it slightly wraps around the apex. Because of this, I use a slightly smaller angle on the strop than I do on the sharpening stones. I also don't want to overdo the stropping because that can round over the edge and dull my apex, which would be counterproductive. I start at the largest micron size and work down. And it's important to note that between each strop, you should clean the edge of your blade with some rubbing alcohol, because you don't want to contaminate your smaller, finer strops with the larger diamonds from the coarser strops. Any contamination like that will make that finer strop less effective. And what about this steel honing rod? Should I still be using this every week or every time I use my knives? Well, Alex at Outdoors55 says that these things are pretty much useless. They're not abrasive like a ceramic rod. They don't grind away steel. Their only real function is to straighten out a burr that's been bent over. But if you did your job correctly when sharpening, as you remember, there shouldn't be a burr to bend over or to straighten. And even if you do have a burr, these things don't do that job very well, and you end up doing more damage than good to your edge. So it's sunny now, I guess. So how sharp have I been able to get these knives actually? Well, that begets the question, how do we measure sharpness? I could spend a couple $100 on a Brubacher edge sharpness scale tester like this one. And if this video does well, then I might get one of those to play with in the future. Just kidding, I bought one. And this video is getting expensive. These neat devices quantify how sharp an edge is by measuring the force in grams required to cut a specific test filament that's stretched across this gap. You slowly lower the blade onto the test filament until you reach the minimum amount of force needed to sever it. The lower the score, the sharper it is. According to the chart included with this tester, a knife scoring 400 or more is in need of maintenance. 250 to 350 is where new high-end cutlery usually scores. That factory sharp Husk knife scored a 380. This neglected blade from the back of my cabinet scored a 495. One of these disposable utility blades measured 165. This Work Sharp pocket knife, straight from the factory, also tested 165. This Astra disposable shaving razor measures 40. The best score I've managed using these sharpening techniques on this chef's knife here was 100. This best tester, I don't recommend it for just anyone out there, but for this video and for learning what actually helps get the blade keener, it actually was very helpful. It helped me realize that the 4-micron strop really wasn't doing anything. It actually sometimes made the best score worse. And I recommend starting at 1 micron with the strop because of what I've learned from this tester. And then going to a 1/10 or maybe a 0.25 micron after the 1 micron. But if you just want to do one strop, then do the 1 micron strop compound. And this isn't the end-all be-all of sharpness tests. It won't tell you everything about a blade's edge, but it is the most scientific thing that I found to measure sharpness, and it has been very helpful. There are other tests that you can use to measure your sharpness. A quick one is the thumbnail test, or any fingernail test. You can even use your toenail if you want to. You hold the blade at a slight angle and drop it down slowly onto your thumbnail. If it just slides off your thumbnail, it's pretty dull. If it catches and sticks there using only the weight of the blade, then it's sharper than the dull one. There are many other tricks to try. A word of caution about these is that they rely just as much on technique as on the keenness of your edge. But as long as your technique is consistent, they can tell you something about the edges that you're able to achieve. So paper cutting is the most basic. One great thing about cutting paper is that if your blade catches or tears the paper at a specific point, it can demonstrate that that part of the edge is imperfect and needs work. If you can do curvy cuts in your paper, that's even sharper. You can cut a toilet paper tube or cut it curvy. A standing water bottle, the horizontal tomato test, grape, and carrot. Receipt paper and newspaper are both more difficult to cut than printer paper because they are thinner and denser. Freestanding newspaper is a really tough one. If you want to have some fun with this and get dramatic, you can do a samurai style slice of a freestanding paper towel tube. And then the one that I found to be the hardest in paper is actually a paper towel. Getting a clean slice on a paper towel is extremely difficult, and I have yet to be able to slice all the way through an entire paper towel in one motion. I feel like I'm close, but I haven't gotten there yet. Never mind. I've cracked the code. It was a technique issue. Just have to support both sides of the top of the paper towel like that. Well, almost. And this too relies just as much on technique as it does on the keenness of your edge. But if you don't have a keen edge, a very keen edge, no amount of technique will allow you to slice a paper towel cleanly. And then there are the hair-based tests. There's shaving sharp. And if your knife is on the border of being shaving sharp, you might be able to shave, but it will hurt, or if it feel more like the hair is being torn out of your arm than actually being shaved. That's not good. You want it to be a clean shave. Then there's hair popping sharp, where the blade passed through the hair without touching any skin or being supported, just pops the hair in half. There's hair whittling, which Alex at Outdoors55 often uses to demonstrate the keenness of a blade. And he's much better at it than I am. I was able to get a few small whittles, but I'm not yet at the point of getting super clean, nice hair whittling. That might be just because I'm not a practiced hair whittler, but it's probably also because I have not yet achieved maximum sharpness, and I'm going to keep practicing. But where does a guy like me get long hairs like this to test on? Chewy! Chewy! Good girl. Sit. That's a good girl. Give me some of that. Thank you. I'm gonna end this video by completely blunting this knife and then sharpening it back to a keen edge with no cuts. Just kidding, I've decided to make that a separate video and not make this video 40 minutes long. So subscribe and I'll release that video soon after this one.